Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm addressing those who are present in the hearing room here in Edinburgh, and also those who are following the proceedings online through the live feed. We're resuming hearings in the Scottish Hospitals Inquiry, and over the next 2 weeks and possibly a day, we are dealing with issues in relation to the Royal Hospital for young persons, for children and young persons in Edinburgh. Now, I have on my right Deputy Counsel to the Inquiry, John McGregor KC, who is instructed by one of the inquiry solicitors, Leslie Brown. I'm assisted by Kirsten McMillan, who is sitting on my left. And I think, Mr. McGregor, we're probably able to begin.
Yes, the first witness would be Michael O'Donnell.
Good morning, Mr. O'Donnell. As you understand, you're about to be asked some questions by Mr. McGregor, who is on my right. But first, understand you're prepared to take the oath.
Yes.
Please just remain seated, but can I ask you to raise your right hand and repeat these words after me? Swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
and
nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. The plan will be to hear your evidence in much of the morning that requires. I would plan generally to take a coffee break about 11:30, so there will be a break in the course of the morning. But if for whatever reason, and you don't have to give a reason, you want to take a break at some time that seems good to you, please just indicate to them and we can take a break. So feel that you have control of the situation. Okay, right. Mr. McGregor.
Thank you. You're Michael O'Donnell, is that correct?
Yes.
And you've provided a witness statement to the inquiry, and a copy should be available to you today if you require it. For anyone following with the bundles, it's in bundle 13 from pages 274 to 296. Now, Mr. O'Donnell, the content of that statement is going to form part of your evidence to the inquiry, but you're also going to be asked some questions by me today. If at any point you don't understand the question, please just do let me know. Equally, if you want to refer to your statement at any point, please let me know. We can have a short break and you can refresh your memory on anything. Okay. I just want to begin by asking you some questions about your career, which you set out in your statement from paragraph 1 onwards. You tell us that you've been an engineer since 1988 and you joined Hulley and Kirkwood in 1989, becoming a chartered engineer in 2007. And you explain some of the work that you've undertaken for Hulley and Kirkwood, where you're a company director and a shareholder in the business. Just, I think by way of general introduction, could you explain to the inquiry, just in a general sense, what type of work does Hulley and Kirkwood undertake?
Hulley and Kirkwood are mechanical and electrical engineering services design consultants. We work in all sectors of the construction industry, so residential, schools, commercial office buildings, and healthcare. The business actually started 70 years ago this year and was a healthcare focused consultancy originally.
And again, could you just give us a sort of broad overview of what's your role at Hulley and Kirkwood and what type of work do you specifically undertake?
I'm a board director. I'm director of the Edinburgh office, and I lead that office in terms of submissions for new commissions, managing the designers within the office, the staff, and the business generally.
So Hull and Kirkwood would have mechanical and electrical engineers undertaking design work, and it's a team effectively with you at the top managing another group of engineers.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, you've mentioned both today and in your statement that you've got experience in the healthcare sector, and you give some examples at paragraph 2 of your statement. So, for example, you mentioned work that you'd undertaken on the Hull Oncology Department. Broadly speaking, what type of work were you undertaking on that project?
That was a PPP procurement type project. We were employed by the mechanical electrical services contractor to design mechanical electrical systems for what is now called the Queen's Centre for Oncology and Haematology. It's around 15,000 square metres. It was a £65 million project. It, from memory, commenced 2005, I think, something like that, and completed 2007, 2008.
So coming in on the contractor side as a subcontractor to do the detailed mechanical and electrical engineering design work?
Well, actually under the PPP bid process, the contractors are formed early to actually engage with the client team to become preferred bidders, and then actually develop design with a design team collectively.
So you were part of the design team for the contractor, or part of the design team for the health?
For the contractor.
For the contractor. You give a second example of being involved in work in the Victoria Hospital in Kirkcaldy. What work did you undertake on that project?
Similar. We were employed by successful bid contractor. That was 50,000 square metres, new build acute hospital, circa 250 million pounds, and commenced 2005 and completed October 2011.
And a third example that you give is the original Royal Infirmary projects. We'll come on and talk about the replacement hospital for the sick kids in Edinburgh, but you mentioned at the start that you were involved in the original Royal Infirmary project in Edinburgh. What work were you on that project?
The existing estate had various legacy improvement, maintenance issues, refurbishments, alterations. It was that kind of work in the early years of my career.
I now want to move on and ask you some specific questions about your involvement in the project for the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People and the Department of Clinical Neurosciences. And you explain in paragraph 4 of your statement that Hull and Kirkwood were appointed as a mechanical and electrical consultant. This is at the stage in the project when it's a design and build project as opposed to a revenue funded project whereby BAM construction are the design and build contractors. Can you just explain at this point in the project, why are Hurley and Kirkwood brought in and what are you doing?
So Hurley and Kirkwood are on the healthcare frameworks too, as a consultant listed on that framework, and so we can be chosen by partner contractors, principal supply chain contractors to work with them on any particular commission that they are given.
Now, it might be easy if you actually just have your statement in front of you, if we could look to paragraph 5. So within bundle 13, that should be on page 275. So you see just at the start of paragraph 5, you say, due to it being a capital funded project, wasn't constrained to a set of reference design deliverables at that time. Can you just explain to the inquiry, what do you mean by this term reference design deliverables?
The reference design was a finite set of deliverables outputs to try and inform the combined SITKIDS DCN cost model, to try and set out how the services infrastructure on a constrained site should be managed and altered, and to try and inform the massing of the building such that it could be submitted for a planning in principle application in advance of the project then following through a bid process.
So that's relevant if you're talking about a revenue funded project. Why is that not relevant if you're talking about a capital funded project?
The capital funded project wasn't constrained to those specific sets of deliverables because it was following a journey to, the intention was to design it through all of the REBA stages, so through outline design, scheme design, technical design, reach a full business case, and then a contractor is authorised to then go and construct that project. So actually a journey encompassing the full design.
I just want to be clear that I'm understanding it. On a capital funded project, then you're effectively trying to fix a design, whereas on a revenue funded project, you're trying to come up with effectively the concepts that someone would bid against, as opposed to a fully fledged design. Is that correct?
Well, that just happened to be unique for the SITKIDS DCN. I think the motivation was to build upon design information that had been carried out for the SITKIDS under the original procurement process, but constrain it to only a set of deliverables to inform the things that I previously mentioned, and then draw a line under that and let a bid contractor or a set of bid teams appoint a contractor, and then let the due process of technical design take place through that procurement route.
We'll come on to look at this in a bit more detail, but I think one thing I'd welcome your views on just at the outset is this idea that if you have design work that's been done on a capital funded project where you're trying to fix the design, whether it is always going to be relevant to lift that and try to put that into a revenue funded project. Is that design work always going to be relevant if you switch model?
No, it's not. It's not always going to be relevant. Also, because the building design had changed, the schedule of accommodation had changed because the SITKIDS was combined with the DCN, and so larger building meant other considerations had to be taken into account in the design of that larger building.
Just returning to your statement at paragraph 6, you mention a meeting that we'll come on to talk about, but you introduced Nightingale Architects. So Hulley and Kirkwood are engaged on a mechanical and electrical engineering side. Who are Nightingale Architects and what's their role in the project at this?
They were the architects appointed on that framework to support BAM also. So their role was to be lead designer, to provide the architectural solution for the building, work with the healthcare planner, pull together the schedule of accommodation from project briefing, set out departmental adjacencies, and then with our input integrate the mechanical electrical services information into the design. So plant rooms, service distribution risers, informing distribution routes, that sort of thing, in conjunction with civil and structural engineers.
There's two concepts that keep coming back to in your evidence. One's room data sheets and the other's an environmental matrix. You just explain to the inquiry your understanding of both those concepts. Firstly, what a room data sheet is, and secondly, what an environmental matrix is.
Yeah, so a room data sheet formulates all aspects of a particular room within a particular department in a hospital, and that room data sheet will set out the room function. It will set out things like important points on finishes. It will set out the desired area for that room. And one element of the room data sheets is the environmental data that goes with that room.
The room data sheet, bespoke sheet for each room in the hospital with a range of characteristics, including environmental.
Yes.
And what then is an environmental matrix?
So the environmental matrix is just about the environmental parameters. It doesn't take consideration of those other measures other than abstracting from the departmental schedule of accommodation, what the department is, what the room name is, and then fleshing out the environmental approach for that particular room in a summary matrix format.
And in terms of each of these documents, if we take them in turn, room data sheet, who within the design team would be producing those?
Actually, it can be the client. Original ADB room data sheets can be produced by the client. They can be produced for key rooms and then handed over to the healthcare planner or the architect to develop a full suite of information thereafter.
Just to be clear, we're talking about a room data sheet that would include technical engineering information. That wouldn't be produced by an engineer, is that correct?
The input of an engineer is necessary, but not necessarily from the base route information.
And in contrast, the environmental matrix, what entity within the design team would do that?
Usually the mechanical electrical consultant.
If I could ask you to have your statement in front of you, please, and if we could look at paragraph 6. So that should be on page 275 of bundle 13. We're at 2009, still within the capital phase of the project. And you state in your statement, on the 14th of December 2009, the design team meeting held by BAM Construction, which I attended. At this meeting, it was confirmed that the DCN reprovision will not be delivered as part of a joint and build RHSC at Little France. Internal summary notes set out the focus for the RHC project going forward. Nightingale architects were also in attendance. They advised that ADB NHS been through the user review process already, that these would be issued to facilitate codebook, that environmental data would be generic, that Hulley and Kirkwood were to develop a bespoke environmental matrix to take over from the information contained in the sheets. This was our first instruction to environmental spreadsheet. See that? If we take this in stages, there's a reference there, you being advised that there was ADB files from NHS Lothian. What were they?
At that meeting, we did not have ADB files, so I think from the notes, the references that the architect either had them or was told they were available. So they, I know from having received them a few months later that they were ADB files for each department for the Sick Kids Only project.
So was this, again, is this a database of information or is this specific room data sheets?
This is published output from a database into PDF room data sheets, formulated into a set of room data sheets per department.
So is that effectively a bespoke ADB database for this project?
The ADB sheets are listed as draft. So whether they went through a process to get to a bespoke stage, I'd say they were bespoke insofar as they represented the rooms that the client desired to inform the schedule of accommodation. But whether every single part of those room data sheets had been populated through a bespoke process, I would say no, having freshly reviewed them.
Do you know who produced that, whether it was NHS Lothian or whether it was Nightingale Architects? Do you know that?
I think their file extension, check that, but I think they're NHS Lothian ADB sheets.
And you said, in fairness, I just want, you weren't sure who'd reviewed them or what process they'd been through at that stage?
No, so the way we received them was, it was April 2010, by virtue of a copy email from BAM to BMJ Architects, who were working in conjunction with Nightingale Architects on that reference, the original Sick Kids scheme. I saw the email exchange went from BAM to BMJ Architects to say, here's a mail chain that stems from a couple of days before that. It originates from Nightingale Architects sending the ADB zip file to BAM to say, we've received this information.
And did you know whether that information had been reviewed by clinicians or people involved in infection prevention and control at that point in time?
So just on a fresh review of the sheets, when you inspect the actual sheets, the date, the publishing date, it would appear on the bottom right-hand corner of the sheets is September 2009, all of them. But actually there's another text cell in the top right-hand corner of the sheets, and that relates to what's listed as revision note. And in that, it says, I think it says initial draft or first draft, or draft even, I might just say draft. But you can see from that some departments, at least one that I viewed, seems to have been commenced from year 2007. Lots of other departments from year 2008 and some year 2009.
Whenever you got the file, I think you mentioned at this meeting in 2009, but it comes to you in 2010. Did you raise any of these issues about how this document had been created, who had created it, and what clinical input there had been on it?
Well, I hadn't, because at the time of this meeting, we had no sight of them. We were simply told that the architect had obviously either seen them or had feedback that they were available. And when I say in my statement they had been through user review process already, I think in context that probably meant that the user review process was to inform the room areas per department, but not so far as they had been through a detailed technical review for the environmental data, because the environmental data is either missing, or the data that's in there does not line up with, in most circumstances, with the latest guidance that came out at that time, which was HTM 0301, so the English version of year 2007. However, when you look back at the timeline, that guidance came out late 2007. It came out in November 2007. So I do not know whether that data or that guidance was available or familiar to whoever published and informed those room data sheets. But from my view, it does not look like it was.
You mentioned at paragraph 6 that there's the instruction for Hull and Kirkwood to produce the environmental metrics. This information that we've talked about, the ADB files from NHS Lothian, was that data being used to create the environmental matrix?
It was not. It was not because at that meeting, we did not have that information in any event. It only came to us 4 months later. So by April 2010, and on date timelines, we did not receive a schedule of accommodation that we could use to develop a matrix until I think it was August, September 2010. Actually, it was July 2010. And our first environmental matrix was produced September 2010. So we were informed at that meeting that the environmental data was generic, was the term used. So, and now having again looked at those matrices, I think that serves to mean that the information was incomplete or not purified.
And just in simple terms, we say it's generic, incomplete, unpurified. Is it something a mechanical and electrical engineer could have used to populate an accurate environmental matrix that complied with all the relevant technical published guidance?
No, had we used the data within those ADB sheets to populate a matrix, much of the information you would need in a matrix to serve its true function would be missing or incorrect.
Again, just focusing on this issue of the instruction to produce the environmental matrix, who is it, or which entity is it that's telling Hull and Kirkwood to develop an environmental?
I actually can't recall all my notes from that meeting record as the advice from the architect. I don't have a recollection that anyone else in that meeting, BAM or otherwise, it would really ought to come from BAM as being our employer, that we should produce an environmental matrix. And I've checked and can find no follow-up formal email instruction or otherwise.
Just want to be clear, I appreciate this is events a long time ago, but your recollection is there's a requirement to create an environmental matrix.
Yep.
But you're not clear if that was an instruction coming directly from NHS Lothian, BAM Construction, or whether this is a discussion between Nightingale Architects and Hull and Kirkwood.
No, I took that advice at face value in that meeting, and we made the assumption that was a formal instruction.
And was the intention that the environmental matrix would effectively take the place of room data sheets produced using the activity database system?
That was never discussed, and it could never take place of the full content of ADB sheets. It could only take the place of the environmental data in the ADB sheets and serve the purpose of trying to go through a manageable journey to populate the information and then share it, discuss it, review it, fine-tune it through the stages of design and engagement with users as normal due process would dictate.
I could ask you to have a document in front of you, please, from bundle 4 at page 275. So this should be an email from you sent to BAM Construction on the 15th of February 2010.
Yep.
There's an email where you say, "Hi David." Can you remember who David was?
David Muir. He's BAM.
And if I could perhaps just ask you to look like 2/3 of the way down the page, there's a bold heading, HK Scheme Design. You see just 3 lines up from the bottom of that paragraph, there's a sentence beginning with regards to environmental issues. Do you see that?
Yes.
With regards to environmental issues, rather than employ ADM&E sheets, HK will produce environmental matrix spreadsheet for each room type for easy reference as a user sign-off tool. See that?
Yes.
We just take that and say, what did you mean by rather than employ ADB M&E sheet that the environmental matrix would be produced?
I guess that was formalising what had been instructed to us from that December 2009 meeting. So this is 15th of February 2010. So it's then moving through into the context of this email was all about fleshing out a programme and me commenting on the programme and how the interdependencies of information would be needed to inform design. And so that particular subject matter on item 169 is related to the need for information to inform design, which relates to environmental data.
But was your understanding that there would still be room data sheets for the project?
I think it probably was listed in the content that was being shared. So from that, I guess so. I don't know. I can't recall from that time that was the case.
And just finally, in that paragraph, you use the term user sign-off tool. What did you mean by the term user sign-off tool?
Well, it recognises that the environmental matrix is something that needs to have discussion. Whilst we take the lead in populating it, it needs to be shared with the client team to make sure that what we think is, for example, a treatment room is indeed a treatment room, and that the environmental data that goes with that room is the correct approach. So it goes to the point that it's not always clear from briefing or from room layouts that are produced from briefing that a particular room function is indeed that function, or whether there's been some interpretation of it, and then if there is, it needs to be reviewed, discussed, clarified.
And who are you meaning when you talk about the user? Who's the user that would have to sign it off?
Ultimately, the client. It's to try and get to a point where the client has gone through an engagement process and is satisfied that that's an agreement that those environmental approaches that are in the matrix do represent what they need.
And at this stage in the project, is that BAM Construction, is it NHS Lothian, or is it both?
In my mind, that's the client, that's NHS Lothian, because they ultimately, they and their clinical team are the ones who what they want. So it comes down to that.
And at this stage, were you having any direct engagement with any clinicians from NHS Lothian?
I can't recall any specific names, but there may have been shared input. But normally, normally the conduit on projects of this size are you have to communicate through project managers to then communicate to the client side to try and, I guess, just record and formalise the flow of information.
But in terms of that flow of information, were you sitting down directly or speaking on the telephone directly with clinicians from NHS Lothian?
No.
And was that unusual in a project of this type?
No, it's not unusual, but it can happen.
We're still within mail. You just towards the bottom of the page, you've got an and FYI ... Do you see that?
Yep.
And then you make reference to stage 4 construction period look ahead. Say, please note the following additional head issues. Turn over the page onto page 279. You see at the first bullet point, it says detailed design will be incomplete at FBC stage. By FBC, do you mean final business case, or what do you mean by FBC?
Yeah, final business case or full business case.
You say detailed design will progress beyond FBC as identified in item 34, construction information 3/4 of the master delivery programme. Can you just explain why would detailed design be incomplete at final business case?
Yeah, so quite often on projects of the size and scale, the process to go through what we call spatial coordination with other disciplines, other design disciplines, architects, structural engineers, ourselves, is taking your your technical design and then merging and forming them into what we know can fit spatially within service risers, the openings within floor slabs, the service zones within ceiling voids, the size of plant rooms, making sure that the finite detail of it all comes together. And quite often that needs more time than is offered in programming. And I think back then I was making the point that the timescales to go to FBC, in my experience, would not facilitate the time involved to do that.
And the environmental matrix at that stage in the project, is it a rigidly fixed document, or is it a fluid document that's still open to development?
Well, the aim by FBC, and I think we state this in the first versions of the matrix for the original Sick Kids project, was the aim was to try and get to an agreed position by FBC, and and that allows you to fulfill technical design, because the air change rates that are in the matrix then inform a whole bunch of other things. Ductwork distribution sizing, air handling plant sizing, that then informs heat main sizing, heat plant sizing, cooling sizing, all sorts of things. So it's a key document to allow you to then fulfill the technical design with certainty.
Mr. Donald, just for the benefit of my note, you use the expression get to an agreed position. Could you just maybe flesh out what you mean by an agreed position?
What I mean is that the matrix aligns with the rooms within the final schedule of accommodation at that stage, so that they're aligned, and that all the room types, the room functions, the air change treatment, wherever there are discrepancies or misunderstandings or misinterpretations, go through a discussion, review, purification process to get everyone to agree, yeah, that's correct and what should be provided.
Thank you.
I picked you up as saying that the aim is that the environmental parameters set out in the environmental matrix should be, in an ideal world, fixed at financial close. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be ideal.
You say that would be ideal. Does that always happen on large projects of this nature?
It doesn't always happen, no.
What would the risks be for all parties that wasn't achieved if it wasn't agreed?
Well, the risks in relation to cost. If the schedule of accommodation area isn't fully developed and agreed, then the matrix may have to be changed. If the matrix has to be changed, it may have to accommodate additional rooms or different room types, and that would then change or inform design that may or may not have progressed to detail by that stage. And then the knock-on effects of other associated information, technical schedule specifications that are informed by that design thereafter could all be at risk of change, and therefore there would be a time to bring it back up to date, and then time, cost, what the changes were, time to reprogram beyond that.
Would it be an oversimplification to say that the contractor wouldn't know what they had to build and the client wouldn't know what they were getting in terms of environmental parameters?
I think that would be an extreme interpretation, because I wouldn't expect by FBC that it would be 95% wrong, but 95%, 98% right would be more like it, and perhaps some loose ends of briefing changes that might have occurred could be facilitated beyond that point, because on large healthcare schemes that take time to go through design stages, are exposed to the fact that clinical requirements change over those periods, and even guidance changes over those periods. And so, there's always an opportunity for realignment and rethinking things over those timelines.
I picked you up as saying it should be 80-90% complete by financial close. In your experience, would it be unusual for the entirety of an environmental matrix setting out all of the environmental parameters for mechanical and electrical engineering to become reviewable design data at financial?
After financial close?
After financial.
All of it, yes. I would have thought, yes, I would have thought that most of it would and could have been populated before financial close.
And again, just so I'm clear, if that did happen, if all of the environmental parameters were reviewable design data, what are the possible problems or risks that could arise on a project of this?
That briefing has been misunderstood, and therefore the design does not reflect what is required, and therefore the planning to construct would be compromised.
Thank you. The next document that I'd ask you to have in front of you is from Bundle 4. It's page 280. So Bundle 4, page 280. And this is an email from you, Michael O'Donnell, again to Mr. Muir of BAM Construction, this time on the 8th of September 2010. Do you see that?
Yes.
You state there, further to recent discussions, please find attached first issue HK RDS Environmental Matrix. This document is intended as an easier tool to replace ADB RDS M&E sheets for the elements covered in the matrix. The matrix has been developed using SOA V7, issued on 25th May 2010, the key driver for design for M&E services. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Again, it's really just to see if you could help with this idea that it's intended as an easier tool to replace ADB RDS M&E sheets. So was it replacing them, or was there still always going to be data sheets?
Again, it was only replacing the environmental data with within ADB sheets. It could never replace the other elements of ADB sheets that would inform the client's brief. And it was reduced. When I say as a easier tool, I meant as an easier tool to allow engagement and review, because even if the ADB environmental data had been properly populated on the original drafts, there are thousands of sheets, and it becomes unmanageable when change occurs. To control the flow of information and make sure that it's all still current and aligned, in my experience. And I think that's where the tool of a matrix probably comes from.
And you mentioned that it's been developed using SOA. For those of us not familiar with that acronym, what do you mean by SOA?
That's what the architect produces, the schedule of accommodation. So that's a schedule, that's a spreadsheet that's produced to capture the whole building area summary, all of the individual departments' net internal and gross internal areas, and then from that, within each department schedule of area, individual rooms, sometimes the briefed target area versus the drawn area, if drawings have managed to be progressed to reflect that schedule of accommodation.
And you mentioned that this would be a driver for design. What had to happen?
Meaning that the driver for design goes back to the population of the matrix with the room types, the appropriate air change rates, the appropriate pressure regime, etc. And then using that to pair with the architect floor plan layouts to then work through the design of individual services elements. And by that I mean in the mechanical services design elements, ventilation, heating, chilled water, the systems, the air handling systems that go with that information.
Thank you. Just before we move on to look at the environmental matrix produced by Hulley and Kirkwood in 2010, if I could ask you to have a look at a document within Bundle 12, Volume 1, at page 80. This is an appendix to a submission that's been submitted on behalf of NHS Lothian to the inquiry. And NHS Lothian have informed the inquiry that this was effectively what they would characterise as the bespoke ADB database that had been produced for the project. We've already discussed that issue, but in terms of the material that you saw, is this the type of information that was being provided to you? This is just one example among many, but I just want to be clear, is this the type of information that you were talking about earlier?
Yes.
We see there is ADB, activity database, it's a room environment data, and then we see a whole host of parameters being set out on the left-hand side. For example, winter temperature, summer temperature, mechanical ventilation supply, mechanical ventilation extract, etc. That's the type of information you'd been provided with?
Yeah.
But you'd mentioned that you had concerns over the accuracy of that information as opposed to technical guidance?
Yes.
Hulley and Kirkwood then went on to produce various iterations of an environmental matrix whenever we're still within the capital funded phase of the project. If I could ask you to have in front of you Bundle 4, please, at page 43. bundle 4, page 43, which should be an environmental matrix from September of 20. See the Royal Hospital for Sick Children, Edinburgh HK document, RDS environmental matrix, and then we see various issues. So there's the page number, the department code, the index. Within the index, we've got guidance notes. Why would you apply guidance notes to an environmental matrix? Why would that be?
Because the suite of healthcare guidance is vast, and that guidance is at various stages of currency, and the guidance notes here are attempting to pull together what's important to note on what's key notes with reference to current guidance. So this being the original Sick Kids scheme, at that period, the Scottish healthcare guidance that was current was SHTM 2025. And we recognised that actually, historically, that doesn't provide air change rates for various room types in a healthcare facility other than operating. So the new HTM 0301 from year 2007 that had come out, we used that to flesh out what we thought was important to state in terms of the air change approach for key room types, but also cross-refer to other important guidance like HBN 57, which relates to critical care departments, and try and summarise key points to note from those elements of guidance and have it out there and up front as important watch points.
From your perspective, guidance notes were important watch points for anyone that's provided with the document.
Correct.
Now, you also have a section in the index called comments summary. Who were you expecting to comment on the draft?
Essentially aimed at the users, the hospital clinical leads, the people who brief the rooms, the departments, the schedule accommodation.
So just because you're an engineer, but you're anticipating that there's going to be some form of clinical input and comment on your draft.
Yes. Yes.
And what would that involve? Because one of the issues that the inquiry is trying to grapple with is engineers say, well, I'm an engineer, I'm not a clinician. And a clinician says, well, I'm a clinician, I'm not an engineer.
Yes.
How do the two disciplines come together to make sure that both views are reflected within a technical document?
It requires discussion. So, if I'm an engineer and I have some doubt over the interpretation of the current guidance for a given room, or a room type. So in the HTM 0301 2007, big step forward as it was at that time, in the appendix table of, let's say, key or typical room types in healthcare facilities, they don't always cover every single room type that's briefed or drawn in a hospital. And so there has to be a discussion about what would therefore be the most appropriate selection from those room type schedules or other guidance to arrive at the correct approach.
Again, we'll come on and look at this in slightly more detail, but the inquiry's already heard an earlier chapter of evidence about, of course, health technical memorandums and associated guidance. And you're obviously familiar with those because you said SHTM 2025 didn't have any guidance in terms of specific air change rates. Is that correct?
Correct.
But around about this time, health technical memorandum in England, 0301, does introduce air change rate.
Yes.
But we don't yet have Scottish Health Technical Memorandum, SHTM 0301, specific Scottish guidance with those air change rates set out.
That's correct.
If this is relatively new, with health technical memorandum having air change rates for specific areas, was that a judgment you could make in terms of how an environmental matrix was populated, or was that something that you had to have a discussion with a clinician about in order to populate the document that we're looking at in Bundle 4?
No, it started, and our approach was that we could get the ball rolling by taking a view on what's appropriate and then share it for review, discussion, purification thereafter.
And when you say you shared it for review, is that you sharing it with BAM Construction, or are you directly sharing it with individuals from NHS Lothian, both clinicians and infection prevention and control individuals?
No, it's through the formal communication protocols. So our information was processed into a project intranet site, and then from there, somehow it's shared with other parties.
You say somehow, again, I just want to be clear, I'm saying, did you not know effectively what clinical input and infection and prevention control input was being provided in the draft? You only knew what was fed back to you from BAM Construction?
Yeah, that'd be the case.
Was that a matter of concern to you at that time in the project?
Well, this was the early stages of the design of that project, so still a long journey to go on. And I think, in reflection, if we were going beyond what was the stage C or stage C concept scheme design stage into technical design, you would want to make sure that that discussion took place.
So you say before technical design, so what is that point? At the minute you're starting with a blank spreadsheet and populating it, at what time would you want to make sure that there had been definitive clinical input into the draft?
Well, definitely by FBC. So if stage 4, REBA stage 4 technical design leads up to FBC and ideally would be complete by then, sometimes spills over as we've talked about, but certainly across that period.
If we could return to Bundle 4.
Mr. Well, entirely my fault. You've used the expression FBC, and indeed you've used it before. I'm interpreting that as final business close.
And my understanding is it's business
there might
case.
be confusion between final business close.
Yes, so FBC in the terminology as I understand it is final business case or full business case.
So that's the client putting a business case to, for example, government.
Yeah.
Right, thank you.
I could ask you to have Bundle 4, page 43. It might be possible to blow this up on the screen because it's quite small text. But it's really this we're now within the guidance note. Firstly, to look at guidance note 1, you state this workbook is to promote discussion and feedback to develop a workbook by FBC sign-off date and is intended as an easier reference tool to replace AD, RDS, M&E for elements described in these sheets. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And is that effectively the discussion that we've already had about what promoting discussion meant, what the agreed workbook was, and the fact that this wasn't a replacement, in your view, of room data sheet?
No, it wasn't to replace the full suite of room data sheets. That was in order to get to go through that journey to get to something that was.
You see guidance note 2, you say the services matrices are produced tribal SOA sheets version 7, which I think is what we already saw in the earlier email that we looked at. And we see guidance note 5, it's ventilation air change rates and the use of natural ventilation in patient areas shall be reviewed throughout the detailed design process to ensure a maximum internal temperature of 28 degrees is not exceeded for more than 50 hours. Did that temperature of 28 degrees, did that change during the project?
It did. So that's paraphrasing from the HTM guidance. So the HTM guidance sets out that 28 degrees not exceeded by 50 hours per annum is the guidance benchmark normally, and on the original Sick Kids project, the client NHS Lothian, based on the experience of living with the original ERI project, the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary, where ward bedroom were provided only with natural ventilation, with opening windows and obviously closing windows, but even in summertime, the feedback was that with opening windows that the spaces were uncomfortable frequently through summer times. And so their reflection was that 25 degrees would be a more appropriate standard to aim for.
So at a later point in the told that NHS Lothian wants something that's better than the published guidance, but not at this stage in the.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly when the 25 arrived, in truth.
We could look down to guidance note 14. I won't take you through all of what's set out at 14, but you see that there's a bold subheading of critical care areas.
Yes.
About 2/3 of the way down the page. It states design criteria HTM 0301, especially appendix for air change rates, 10 AC, HR, S&E, 18 degrees to 25 the control range. Capability shall be provided, but not at the summer and winter external ambient design extremes. Can you just explain why is there a specific reference there for critical care areas to 10 air changes per hour?
Because it's one of the important areas to highlight what the approach is.
And if we look down within in detail of the spreadsheet onto 46, page 46 should have in the top left-hand corner RHSC B1 critical care stroke HDU neonatal surgery. Do you see that?
Yes.
And again, perhaps about halfway down the page, do you see a spreadsheet entry that says open plan bay 4 beds?
Yes.
Am I right in thinking that that's telling us that there's an open plan bay with 4 beds within critical care area, and then we see a range of environmental parameters?
Yes.
And if we look along the ventilation, we see both for supply and extract that there's 10 stated.
Yes.
Is that reflecting the fact that you're within critical care, within a critical care area, you need 10 air changes per hour according to the English guidance, the HTM?
Correct.
If we look slightly further down, so effectively the bottom of the paragraph with open plan bay, so about maybe 3/4 of the way down, do we see an entry single bed cubicle?
Yes.
Do you see that? This is a single bed cubicle, but you're still within critical care. And if we look along the environmental parameters to the ventilation, supply and extract, we see that supply is stated to be 4 air changes an hour.
Yes.
Okay. Why was that figure included?
It was incorrect. We corrected it in the next version of the matrix.
So what should it have been?
10.
And again, just in fairness to you, you say you corrected that. If we could just look on, still within bundle 4, look this time to page 60, please. This is a version states that it's from the 22nd of December 2010. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is that the updated iteration that you just mentioned in your evidence?
Yes. Okay.
And if we look down page 65, right, it's page 64. You should see that the single bed cubicle entry is still about 3/4 of the way down. Do you see that on the left-hand side, single bed cubicle?
Yeah.
And then if we look along parameter for ventilation, both supply and extract, both have been changed in red to 10.
Correct.
Obviously that issue that you've highlighted, the mistake spotted, do you remember how was that spotted?
I don't have recollection of what provoked that particular correction.
Do you remember if it was feedback from clinicians or if that was something that was spotted in the Hull and Kirkwood side?
No, had that been fed back from clinicians, I would have recorded that on the revision notes. No, I think on reflection, even looking at it now, the single bed cubicle is probably a lobbied isolation room. So I think that goes to the point I'm making, that this process does require a period of purification, reflection and purification.
Thank you. I could ask you to return now to your statement, so that'll be bundle 13 and page 276, please. Paragraph 10. Here you state, I do not recall any significant deviations from the reference design deliverables other than being advised by David Langdon via email on the 19th of January 2010 that a decision had been taken by the PME to instruct Nightingale Architects to cease the production of room data sheets, and that the room data sheets would now be produced by MML. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, we'll come back to talk about the change from capital to revenue funded, but we're now within the revenue funded part of the project, and there's a suggestion that Nightingales aren't going to be producing room data sheets, but Mock MacDonald would be. Do you remember why was it that Mock MacDonald were going to be producing the room data sheet?
I don't. It wasn't explained. It was simply an email communicating that was the plan.
Just again to cover off one issue we discussed about the temperature range going from 28 degrees down to a lower figure of 25 that we'll come on to see. Do you remember if there was a formal derogation procedure that was gone through, or were you simply informed that that was what the client required?
No, there wasn't a derogation procedure for it, and on reflection, because it deviates from the standard, it probably should. But no, I don't think it was. I don't think it was seen at that time. Those nuances of deviation from what would be considered the standards, because that was new standard, when we go back to SHTM 2025, where there was no change rate, nobody was thinking in their mindsets of deviation from standards. And so the notion of derogating from the ventilation guidance wasn't actually in play at that period, other than where you have a design that relates to theatre suites, where there was firm information. But when we move from SHTM 2025 into the world of HTM 0301, and then the catch up with the SHTM 0301 from year 2011, in my mind, when I think back at that period, we hadn't suddenly flipped in our mindsets to thinking about we need to be really sharp about what we are and aren't doing with regards to the guidance.
But again, just so I'm understanding it, at that point in time, the guidance just really having come in, you wouldn't be expecting a formal process for a derogation from guidance, is that correct?
I wasn't even thinking about it at that time.
Just thinking about today, if you were in the same scenario, would you be expecting there to be some formal process for a derogation like in relation to the temperature values?
Definitely.
And again, just to assist in inquiry, what would that derogation procedure involve?
Probably populating derogations schedule with the listed item and recording that the derogation has been formalised.
Again, just so I'm understanding you, a formal piece of paper setting out the derogation and possibly why the derogation was required.
Yes.
That really covers everything in relation to the capital stage of the project. You explain within your witness statement that effectively capital funding is not going to happen. Holly and Kirkwood then aren't involved in the project for a period of time. Then there's a switch to the revenue funding for the project, and Holly and Kirkwood are re-engaged at that point where the funding model switches. So can you just explain how you come to be re-engaged and how your role differs, if at all, from what you were doing at the capital stage of the project?
So we were re-engaged through communication. I think it was through Davis Langdon, who approached us to pull a fee together to reduce a set of specific deliverables against what was being referenced or called as a referenced design scope. And there were a finite set of deliverables, only to inform the particular constraints of the site, building massing, planning in principle, etc., as I've mentioned before.
At this stage, whenever there's a change, is there any consideration or meetings taking place to discuss whether the design work that has been done on the capital funded project is going to be relevant and helpful to the revenue funded project?
There wasn't that discussion, as I recall it, within the design team as such. And the original sick kids got to around stage 2 concept or scheme design with information shared with BAM to try and go through a process of market testing of various packages to help inform a cost plan. But it hadn't gone through a full journey to a stage 4 technical design. With the new Sick Kids DCN being a larger building on essentially the same restricted site within the ERI, the information from the sick kids was useful insofar as I don't think there was a motivation to recast the brief for the sick kids in terms of the schedule of area, departments, the adjacencies, etc., but build on integrating DCN in a sensible way to provide complete building that could then be built thereafter, going through a normal process.
In your view, was a fully populated environmental matrix still required for a revenue-funded project?
No, in retrospect, it wasn't required. What it was doing was serving a purpose of formulating an envisaged approach to allow a cost model to reflect that building created to help inform, I guess, business cases. That's really all it was doing. It was informing building massing for planning in principle. To inform building massing, you need input into the services strategy, because you need to know how the plant rooms and risers will relate to the departments, and so that all helps to inform building massing, including size of energy centre, etc. But that was the aim. That was the aim of the reference design.
Again, just I want to be absolutely clear. In your experience of revenue-funded projects at that point in time, was it normal for the procuring authority to provide a fully populated environmental matrix, or was it more normal for the tenderer or contractor to produce their own environmental matrix?
I think it's more normal for the successful contractor and their design team to produce that matrix, yeah.
And again, I just want to go back to something that you said. You were thinking about, having reflected on things, whether there really was a requirement to provide the fully populated environmental matrix to prospective tenderers. If you were advising on a project like that now, is that something that you would be advising a client to do?
No.
Why not?
Because if it's used to then inform a particular design strategy that may well be slightly different or very different, then it needs to have a matrix that reflects that design strategy. The reference design matrix was produced without having architectural elevational treatment for the reference design, and that was deliberate, such that the approach was not seen to be prescriptive, and it was to allow bidding contractors and their designers to come up with their ideas, their own idea. And in reality, that was the same for the services strategy. And we did articulate that in the thermal comfort report, where we said, with regards to the mixed mode vent approach for ward bedrooms, general ward bedrooms, that mixed mode vent approach was not to be viewed as being prescriptive, and that other solutions could be appropriate.
Mr. O'Donnell, I just missed, I think, 3 words you said. You said environmental matrix, assuming at this moment, Halley and Kirkwood document, probably in its first revision, was produced without, and then you went on to say architectural, and I just missed the word after that.
Elevation treatment.
Elevation treatment.
Yeah. So the things like the building cladding, the window designs, the ventilation design of the windows, etc.
Thank you.
I can actually then just perhaps have your statement in front of you. So we're in bundle 13, page 277, paragraph 11. Bundle 13, page 277, paragraph 11. It's the second sentence, second line beginning for most health projects. See that?
Yeah.
You say for most health projects that Helen Kirkwood have been involved in, the environmental matrix is standard reference briefing document. See that?
Yeah.
In relation to that, are you talking about capital projects or are you talking about revenue funded projects or both?
Seen it on both.
And would you see the environmental matrix being the standard reference briefing document as opposed to room data sheets produced using the activity database system?
I think it has been more commonly used, yes.
Because again, at earlier stages within the inquiry's heard certain evidence to say that actually it's the room data sheets produced using the activity database that would be the standard briefing tool that a client would use. Is that not your experience?
Well, it has been. I have had that experience where it's been used, but more often than not, those room data sheets, environmental data, are either not populated or are a first pass a first pass at what might be appropriate, and they need to go through the same journey of review and purification. And trying to achieve that when you have a very big acute hospital with thousands of pages is very, very difficult.
And is that what you meant in terms of effectively what I've called the bespoke activity database that you were provided with at the earlier stage in the project? You said that you thought that there were problems, gaps, missing information. Is that the type of issue that you're talking about in terms of room data sheet produced using the activity database, full stop?
Yes.
But am I right in thinking in terms of room data sheets produced using the activity database, they would be automatically populated with values held on the spreadsheet?
Well, we have never actually done it, so we don't know how that process works. But from what I understand, the user selects from a database schedule, from a schedule of room types. So if there's treatment room, which is quite a common room in every hospital, they'll pick up treatment room from the schedule. But from what I understand it, there are different styles of treatment room in those in that ADB database. But it does not prevent the user, when they're populating that information, to not populate the environmental data, because we can see that it doesn't come through very often. And we can see that, for example, on the ADB sheets that were provided, every treatment room has a 6-year changes applied to it. Now, it's not 6-year changes, it's 10-year changes. So I don't know how you pull from a database that should have an attribute that says 10-year changes and it appears as 6. But I do not know how that happens.
One of the experts engaged on behalf of the inquiry described room data sheets produced using the activity database as a starter for 10 that would still have to be refined. Like, is that generally within the industry how you would understand that type of document?
Yeah, I think it is. The notion that it's going to be right first time is not reflected in reality.
It could be right for certain things, but you couldn't rely on it to be right for everything. Would that be a fair summary?
Yeah, that would be a fair summary.
But equally, if we think about the environmental matrix, you explain within your statement that it's produced by manually entering figures. Is that correct?
It is.
So does that not give rise to problems as well, that there could be simple manual transcription errors when typing values in?
Yes.
So again, I'd welcome your views in terms of these two systems. It sounds like neither is a perfect system. What one in your experience is a better system that's used by those working in the industry?
Well, if I reflect on the matrix we produced for the sick kids, instead of using the ADB sheets, the matrix produced for the sick kids was far superior because it populated every single room with information, and whilst it wasn't 100% correct, it was almost 100% correct. And I take the view that that's an excellent starting point to then go through a journey of purification that could lead to a successful outcome, easier than trying to do the same thing with the 1,000 pages ADB room data sheets with the environmental data.
We'll come on to discuss the potential errors within the spreadsheet, but again, just focusing on the fact that you're creating the environmental matrix, and at this point there isn't the individual room data sheet produced using the activity database. Do you think it's possible that if room data sheet had been produced from the activity database, that what crept in as an error to the environmental matrix might have been spotted?
No, I think it's probably more likely it wouldn't have been spotted because it's harder to see and find.
You wouldn't view that as a missed opportunity to spot the issue that cropped up?
No.
Just returning to something that we discussed earlier, the notion of, is it the client that prepares the environmental matrix, or is it the contractor that prepares the environmental matrix? Drawing on your experience in the industry, if you were on the contractor side and you were provided with an environmental matrix, how would you view that document? Would you view it as a client brief?
It would depend on the context in which it's shared. So if it's shared as here's an example from the reference design, but it's not prescriptive, it's an example in envisaged approach, then no, I wouldn't be taking it on as being that's the finite brief.
If I could return to your statements, we're within bundle 13 at page 277, still within paragraph 11. 3 lines up from the bottom of the page, still addressing the environmental matrix. Say an environmental matrix attempts to abstract relevant environmental data. Where's the information being abstracted from?
From guidance.
And you just explain in relation to things like ventilation, what would you specifically be talking about? What specific?
Mostly on the original sick kids, it was the HTML301. On the reference design, SHTML301 had been published just before the reference design was formulated. But not just that guidance, there's lots of other guidance, like mentioned before, HBN 57, guidance that relates specific to particular departments is also relevant. HBN 4 for isolation facilities, HBN 4 Supplement 1 for the engineering approach to isolation facilities. All those kind of things come together to try and provide what feel is the best approach from the guidance. Now, it's not always black and white. It's not always clear that there's a consistent set of guidance on what to do. For example, I think you did mention I think it's mentioned in this witness statement regarding HTML 301 and SHTML 301, both of 2007 and 2011 for isolation rooms, list supply air changes in the appendix table 7, extract air changes 0. Yet there's also notes at the side of the tables that refer to isolation rooms could also be negative. There's text in the supporting document that tell you if an isolation room has a particular pressure requirement, supply and extract ventilation may be necessary. So there's a whole bunch of supporting information other than just the table that allows you to formulate what you would put down as an early approach and then try and fine-tune that through discussion and agreement once the design takes shape, users know what they want, the floor plans get populated, etc.
Thank you. Lord Bury, I'm conscious just after 11:30, that might be an appropriate point to take.
I'm just hitting my note. Yes, I think we're pretty square on 11:30. As I said, Mr. O'Donnell, we'll take a break. Hope you have an opportunity for a cup of coffee if you want it. And I hope others also have an opportunity for a cup of coffee. We'll try and sit again let's try and sit again at 1:45. And if we fail in that, let's definitely sit again at 10:10. Thank you.
Please stand.
think we're ready to resume, Mr. O'Donnell. Mr. McGregor.
Thank you. Just shortly before the break, Mr. O'Donnell, we were discussing the potential unreliability of activity database and room data sheets produced using that system. Obviously, with the environmental matrix, you tell us that it was produced by manually entering figures and told us about the raft of guidance that a designer would have to consider. How would a design engineer go about trying to minimise transcription errors entering into an environmental matrix?
It's easy to say that it's just simply a case of reviewing and checking. But somehow this process is more difficult than that to get everything right. There's just such a lot of variables and information, different considerations, that I think that's why when we reflect upon how you get to an end state, that peer reviews is a way to do it, that sharing the information for discussion is a way to get there.
And again, just so that I'm absolutely clear in my own mind, is there no technical solution in place at the moment that would mean that you could take information on the activity database and automatically populate that into an environmental matrix?
Not to my knowledge, but you know, I do believe that the ADB database is the right principle to do that. Now, I know that there's a history of the database being kept aligned with guidance up to a point, and since then been disconnected from continual updates. It strikes me that if it was a database that was kept aligned with current guidance, it should be the sole source of information. And if that database was flexible enough to populate a matrix format of environmental data, I think that would be incredibly useful. And if that environmental matrix, wherever it was altered for good reason, repopulated the room data sheet automatically, that would be incredibly useful. Yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
Again, just so I'm understanding you, am I right in summarising what you've said, that you don't have an issue with the concept of an activity database, but your issue is really about the content of that database and how reliable the information currently stored within it is?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd now like to move on and ask you some questions about a chief executive's letter that will be referred to throughout as Cell 19 2010. That's in bundle 1. It begins at page 553. Now, I won't turn up the reference from your statement, but you tell us at paragraph 37 that this document wasn't raised in meetings or conversations that you were part of whenever you worked on the project. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But subsequently, have you had an opportunity to consider Cell 19 2010?
Yes.
So when did you become aware of the existence of Cell 19?
When it was raised by the inquiry as a piece of policy.
Okay, so having worked in the industry, including on healthcare projects, this document wasn't something that had filtered through to you?
No.
If we just look at the content of the chief executive's letter, you'll see on page 553 the action points, obviously addressed to health boards. It's action point 4, addresses to ensure that a copy of this cell with annexes is cascaded to all appropriate staff within their areas of responsibility. The revised policy on design quality for Scotland and associated mandatory requirements take immediate effect. See that?
Yeah.
But again, from what you've said, I'm assuming you hadn't seen this revised policy on design quality for NHS Scotland when you were working on the project for NHS Lothian.
I have no recollection of seeing this.
We look on to page 556. See the document itself, a policy on design quality for NHS Scotland. We look on to page 557. We see the purpose of the document. The purpose of this document is to provide NHS Scotland bodies with a clear statement of policy on design quality. See that?
Yeah.
Then if we look through to page 566, see that there's a bold heading about a third of the way down, mandatory requirements. There's mandatory requirements, and then they're listed one throughout. If we look over the page onto page 567 and to mandatory requirement 7, which states all NHS Scotland bodies engage in the procurement of both new build, refurbishment of healthcare buildings must use and properly utilise the English Department of Activity Database ADB as an appropriate tool for briefing, design and commissioning. See that?
Yes.
I'd be interested in your views. For the project you were working on, was the activity database being used as a tool for briefing and or design?
Well, the original Sick Kids Only project, it was produced in draft format in dated September 2009. The context in which it was shared, the ability of, so I couldn't say what the intention was for that document. All I could tell you is what we were asked to do thereafter. So, sorry, you're
Really, where I was leading on to is you've told us that at the capital phase there is this bespoke ADB database that's created. My understanding is that you didn't utilise that though when you were creating the environmental matrix.
We didn't utilise it because the information within it wasn't what you would need to utilise.
Yes.
For design.
At the minute, I'm not even making a comment or a criticism. I'm just asking. It tells us here that there's a mandatory requirement on an NHS body to use the activity database as a tool for briefing and design. If we're now at the revenue stage of the project, whereby you've created the environmental using the activity database, I'm just asking for clarification for your views whether the activity database had been used as a tool for briefing or design at that stage, the revenue stage.
For the reference design, Sick Kids DCN, I have no knowledge of there being an ADB database for the combined scheme, so I'm not sure if there is one or not.
Again, just so I'm understanding you, at the capital stage, given the bespoke database, but when you're then re-engaged, you're not using that bespoke database at all on the project. Within mandatory requirement 7, there's then a section in square brackets just after the first paragraph beginning, if deemed. See that?
Yes.
So it says, if deemed inappropriate for a particular project and an alternative tool or approach is used, the responsibility is placed upon the NHS Scotland body to demonstrate that the alternative is of equal quality and value in application. See that?
Yes.
Were you ever asked by either NHS Lothian or Davis Langdon or any of the other partners involved in the project to demonstrate that the environmental matrix approach was of equal quality and value to the activity database?
No.
you think it was of equivalent value to the activity database approach using room data sheets?
Compared to the ADB sheets for the original kids project, in my view, it was higher value.
Within your statement, you make reference to a Scottish Health technical documents with SHTN 0201 on sustainable design, a sustainable design and construction guide from 2021. Can you just explain in generality, why do you want to highlight that document within your statement?
Because that document references the use of an environmental matrix to be created at the start of a project and to be sense checked and reviewed at every design stage of a project with all stakeholders. Which I reference it because somewhere someone thinks that's a useful tool.
So again, just so I'm understanding, current guidance issued suggesting that you should be using an environmental project on a project of this nature, is that correct?
Yes.
And reference within that to sense checking by various bodies, including Health Facilities Scotland?
Yes.
Thinking back to the project we're discussing today, was there any input you're aware of from Health Facilities Scotland when you were working on the project?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Do you understand why not?
No, I don't.
Sorry, my fault. The paragraph of the witness statement you referred to.
So I hadn't actually gone to the statement, but it's
I mean, it was specifically Mr. O'Donnell's reference. Which
indeed, Mother. I'll find that. I will find that.
I lost concentration.
It's in paragraph 12, my lord, on page 278.
Thank you very much. So,
Might be worth just turning up that reference. So it's bundle 13, page 278, paragraph 12.
and it's a reference to SHTN 0201.
Indeed, with the sense of beginning. However, I'd also know.
No, it's entirely my fault. I should have been paying closer attention to it. Even closer attention.
Just perhaps within your statement, while we're there, if we look on to paragraph 13, in the second sentence in the second line, beginning ideally, that you say ideally AD RDS sheets reviewed by clinical leads would be provided as client briefing information at the start of any healthcare project.
Yes.
Why do you say that?
Because there would be a better head start into the process of design if that process were to have taken place.
Would that be best practice?
It would be, yeah, that would be incredible.
And was there a departure from that on the project that we were discussing at the revenue funded stage?
Well, I don't know. There were no ADB sheets that I've seen, so that might imply that didn't happen. I don't know though.
But if they existed, they weren't in your possession when Hulley and Kirkwood are producing the environmental.
No.
And I want to move on and ask you some questions about the environmental matrix created whenever we're within the revenue funded portion of the project, specifically the third issue that's dated the 19th of September 2012. And we'll come on to look at that document in some detail. But you tell us at paragraph 15 of your statement that it was produced by a Mr. Macmillan. Can you just explain to inquire who's Mr. Macmillan and what was his role at Hull and Kirkwood? What was he doing in the project?
He was a design engineer and supported me in producing the outputs for the reference design.
And did that include drafting up the environmental matrix?
It did indeed, yes.
So again, just so I'm understanding things, Mr. Macmillan is a qualified engineer who's undertaking this task. So the production and population of the environmental matrix, that's not simply an administrative task within the office, that's a qualified engineer undertaking it.
It is.
And you've mentioned some of the guidance that yourself and Mr. Macmillan were considering. Am I right in thinking at this point in time there would now be both Health Technical Memorandum 0301 together with Scottish Health Technical Memorandum 0301?
That's correct.
Again, just look briefly at some of the values that are set out there. You mentioned that really there's this change from SHTM 2025 SHTM 0301, whereby there's specific environmental parameters, including air changes per hour, that are being introduced into the standard guidance.
Yeah.
If we look within bundle 1 and look to SHTM 0301, if we could look to bundle 1, page 287. This is Appendix 1 to the guidance, recommended air change rates. Do you see that?
Yes.
And is this what you were referencing in terms of the environmental parameters that were now being set out in guidance?
Yes.
We'd see, for example, an application on the left-hand side with ventilation, air changes per hour, pascals for pressure, etc. in terms of the values.
Correct.
And if we just take two examples, if we've got a general ward, see that the air changes per hour would be 6. If we look further down, we would see for critical care, the air changes per hour should be 10.
Correct.
And is that really just trying to reflect what had been created in the earlier 2010 version of the environmental matrix? Whenever you mentioned, yes, we put in 10 air changes an hour because we had Health Technical Memorandum at that point, but now you would have the same figures, only it was set out in the specific Scottish guidance.
Yeah, we revised the guidance notes to refer to the SHTM.
We'll come on and look at all of that in fairness. When we come on and look at the environmental matrix, for certain areas we'll see 4 air changes an hour, whereby they might look like a general ward that the value within the appendix would be 6 air changes per hour. So why will we see 4 air changes per hour as opposed to 6 air changes?
So that relates to the general ward room mixed mode ventilation approach. So in this table, the general ward supply oblique natural 6 logically cannot mean 6 air changes natural if you have your natural ventilation windows closed. So I don't take it to mean that the 6 air changes is apportioned to a natural vent approach. If you also refer to other text in this document, it sets out the criteria of assessing approaches in relation to natural ventilation first, mixed mode ventilation second, mechanical ventilation third. The motivation being to attempt to come up with the most energy efficient solution for a hospital for obvious reasons. And so we adopted an approach that was aligned to a mixed mode mechanical plus natural approach, which we think is a valid approach described in the guidance.
So for certain of those areas that we might come on to look at, if we see 4, for the reasons you've given, that would still be a system that was complying with the rates set out in Appendix.
Yes.
Again, we'll come on and look at the individual room function reference sheet, but at this stage in the project, as I understand it, Hulley and Kirkwood introduce into the environmental matrix an additional sheet called the room function reference sheet. So what is a room function reference sheet and why did you want to do it?
A room function reference sheet attempts to summarise all of the repeatable room types that make up the full schedule of accommodation. And then address each of those repeatable room types with the appropriate air change rate approach and so on. The reason we created that was trying to make a review process easier and more streamlined, because it was reflecting on the fact that on the original Sick Kids project, whilst we had produced the original matrix and then a revision, there was very little feedback. So we thought that this was a good way to try and make that review life easier. That was the motivation.
And in terms of what we would see in terms of the room functions, obviously we're still looking in Appendix 1, there's various applications, so things like general ward, critical care areas. When we come on to look at the room function reference sheet, we don't see those applications being mirrored. Why not?
Because we were taking the room names from the schedule of accommodation and listing the room names rather than repeat listing rooms that actually may not be relevant to this particular project.
In terms of working out the room function values that would be ascribed, who's doing that? Is that Hulley and Kirkwood? Is it clinicians? Is it a mixture of the?
That's Hulley and Kirkwood.
Again, if we just look within your statement, bundle 13, page 283, at the bottom of paragraph 23. Bundle 13, page 28, bottom of paragraph 23. Say determining the room function is a judgment made by the engineer in the development of the matrix. Do you see that?
Yes.
Why is that a judgment for an engineer as opposed to a clinician, or a decision being taken by both an engineer and a clinician?
Well, I guess it goes back to the process has to start somewhere, and we started it in the knowledge we had from the original Sick Kids project, and we're confident that we could pair that together as a starter for Sick Kids DCN to allow it to be reviewed similarly.
Were you anticipating that this was going to be reviewed? Who were you anticipating was going to do the reviewing?
I guess the client side, the clinicians again.
And you say, I guess, do you know if that took place?
I'm not sure if clinicians reviewed it. I couldn't say. I do know that there was correspondence from, so documents shared through the project protocols, and I think there were evidence of feedback on this one. Yeah, the second issue is noted as revised with NHS Lothian comments, which I think was NHS Lothian project managers and estates reviewed, or people within estates. So yeah,
You got some comments back from NHS Lothian, but in terms of who'd reviewed it and what type of review they'd undertaken, that's out with you. We could then look to the environmental matrix from the 19th of September 2012. So that's within bundle 4, and it begins at page 131. Page 131, we see broadly similar in terms of the index. We've got the cover, the guidance notes. We see inserted at item 3, the room function reference sheet, and then it continues then with listing the various areas and putting ones that we've looked at before, including B1. And we see in the description section, that this is the third issue. We see in the second issue that wardroom Tmax reduced from 28 to 25 degrees Celsius. Do you see that? Page 131, second bottom box, second issue, wardroom reduced from 28 degrees to 25 degrees Celsius. Do you see that?
I'm viewing
The bundle 4, page 131. Yeah, I think you might have the wrong document in front of you, but you see now cover, guidance notes, room function.
I do.
And then at the bottom we see wardroom T 28 to 25 degrees Celsius.
Yeah,
What's that telling us?
That the change from the guidance approach of 28 has been commented upon, and 25 is a desired temperature for a ward bedroom.
Thank you. We then look on to page 132, which should be guidance notes. Again, if we could perhaps just zoom in, we're going to look at 1.5 and 1. This workbook is prepared for the reference design stage. Again, telling us is here in the guidance note, it's going to be prepared for the reference design stage. What's going to happen to it after the reference design stage?
For information, but nothing more than that.
Can use as an easier reference tool to replace AD, RDS, M&E sheet with environmental criteria element described in the. We then see at guidance note 15, critical care areas. This time it's updated, saying design criteria SHTM 0301, especially Appendix 1 for air change rates, 10 air changes per supply, 18 degrees to 25, full range. Is that again referencing the guidance that we've looked at, the SHTM 0301?
It is.
If we then look on to page 133, this what you've described as the room function reference sheet.
It is.
And again, if we're going to just zoom in to look at the very top, some text under room function reference sheet. The final sentence there says, refer to individual department sheets for individual room environmental conditions. Why did you include that? What does it tell us?
The individual department sheets have other information within them that is abstract from this table, really.
And if we look within that, we see the room functions. We see a room function of HDU. About halfway down, if we zoom in, HD. An HDU would have a supply air change of 10 air changes per hour. Why? What was your understanding of HDU? What did that stand for?
HDU is a high dependency unit, which is also known as critical care areas.
And why was it called HD as opposed to critical care?
Because it was in the schedule of accommodation.
These room functions are coming from the schedule of accommodation, as you told us, as opposed to coming from the appendix of SHTM 0301.
Yeah,
And again, if we look perhaps 5 or 6 entries down below HD, an entry for multi-bed wards. If we look along there, see that the supply air change per hour for them is 4, is that right?
Yes.
So am I right in thinking that would be for a multi-bed ward that wasn't within a critical care area?
Yes.
So if you were dealing with a multi-bed ward that was within a critical care area, what values would
It would be HTU 10.
look on page 135? This is the area that's B1, critical care, stroke HD, stroke neonatal surgery. See that?
Yes.
If we look to the second box down, we see an entry called PIC 8 beds. See that box?
Yes.
And then to the right of that, in the room name, final entry is open plan bay 4 beds.
Yes.
We then look to the room function, which is 2 entries across. We're within critical care / HDU, but there's a room function of multi-bed ward. Why do we see multi-bed ward rather than HDU?
It's incorrect.
And again, is that tracked through that if we look across, we see the supply air changes per hour being 4, what should they be?
10.
Again, just if we return to the department subgroup, just as another example, if we look to the box that says high acuity 6 beds, do you see that?
Yes.
And then if we look to the room name, open plan bay 4 beds, do you see
Yes.
that? We look across to room function again, we see multi-bed ward, do you see that?
Yes.
Was that correct or was that an error?
That's an error.
And again, if we look across to the ventilation, we see the supply air changes per hour being 4. Was that correct or was that an error?
Error.
Just thinking back to this type of error seems to be that we've got 4 rather than 10. Was that not the type of error that got spotted back in 2010 from the 2 versions that we looked at before the break this morning?
It was.
Again, can you explain how were these issues that we're looking at in this spreadsheet, how were they not up at this stage?
Reflecting upon on what happened, I think the room function reference sheet has, in a way, blinded me from actually seeing that in the department sheets. So can't explain it any other way that it's been an honest human error.
Given that in terms of the comments that you got in the 2010 version, it was spotted during the review process, even if you had spotted it in your draft, is that the type of issue that you thought would have leapt off the page to anyone else that was reviewing the environmental make?
Probably, but I think anyone else reviewing it has also probably looked at the room function reference sheet and gone with that.
Again, just so that I'm understanding, whenever we're looking at these types of errors, we're simply talking about human error in terms of the wrong room function described, which results in the wrong environmental parameters being put in for critical care.
Correct. We did something to try and improve by creating the room reference sheet as distinctly different from the original SITKID versions of the matrix. We tried to improve it, but instead created this opportunity for transcript errors on reflection. We would not do that again.
You say you wouldn't do it again. How would that be avoided in future? Is it simply not using a room function reference sheet?
Yes.
In relation to the environmental matrix that you had produced, the inquiries heard evidence saying that the reference design team wasn't involved in the production of the procurement document. The idea being that anyone in the reference design team could potentially join a bid team. Was that your understanding?
Yes.
So in terms of the work you were doing, did you know what other people involved in the project were doing in terms of producing the invitation to participate in dialogue that would go out to prospective tenderers? But again, just so I'm understanding, you're producing this information that you've been asked to produce, you produce an environmental matrix. Do you know how that's going to be used during the procurement exercise?
No, as I say in our thermal comfort report, I think that's where it's best articulated that we were presenting an envisaged design approach that wasn't intended to be prescriptive. In the drawings that we produced for the reference design, we stated they were in the context of the reference design only. And indeed in the guidance note 1, it says it's in the context of the reference design only. So our mindset was this was end of journey for that information.
So is that why you say at paragraph 17 statement that you didn't think that it was meant to be prescriptive and that it would be for bidders, particularly the preferred bidder, to effectively be responsible for an environmental matrix at the end of the project?
Yes.
But again, given that you weren't involved in the production of the procurement document, is it fair to say that's an assumption on your part?
Yes.
I can ask you to have in front of you, please, it's bundle 4 and it's page 322. This should be an email from Andrew Duncan dated the 28th of February 2012 to Thomas Brady and some other individuals. Do you see that?
Yeah.
What it says is, Tom, there's an action on the reference design team to confirm that the reference design complies with NHS guidance and legislation. See that?
Yes.
Attach the requirement schedule for each of the reference designers to respond to. We require a statement from each designer to confirm that the reference design complies with the requirement schedule. Should it not fully comply, then each designer shall confirm that the reference design complies with the requirement schedules with a schedule of derogations. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. If we then look on to page 324, see a document, it's got Nightingale Associates, BMJ Architects, Hulley and Kirkwood and Arup.
Yes.
Okay. Have you seen this document before? It's called a derogations list. What was it and what input did Hulley and Kirkwood have to it?
It was a document that summarised the design team's view of where guidance was not specifically complied with for any particular reason.
If we look on then to page 325, so the following are the comments compiled by Nightingale, BMJR, Hulley and Kirkwood, Arup, regarding Mock McDonald document reference design compliance statement requirement dated the 28th of February 2012 and matters relating to compliance generally, derogation. See that?
Yes.
And then we see paragraph 2, reference design compliance statement requirement, and we see the third entry, health building notes. We followed these there is no equivalent Scottish guidance, where there's no equivalent Scottish guidance. Do you see that?
Yep.
Below that, health facilities notes and Scottish health facilities notes follow SHFNs where applicable or where they're referred to clothing staff, FHN only when available by Lothian, then health guidance notes and Scottish health guidance notes as above. And finally, health technical memoranda and Scottish health technical memoranda. We have followed SHT, also HT, where there's no Scottish equivalent. See that?
Yes.
What checks had yourself and your colleagues undertaken on the environmental matrix to allow that definitive statement?
Well, checks were made in relation to the guidance notes that are on the matrix. It's evident that we moved from HTM 0301 to SHTM 0301, and then focused on any of the other guidance notes that had to be updated with respect to that statement. And then reflecting back at that time in that period, we didn't have a mindset of listing what might be considered a deviation from a particular piece of guidance. Because of existed before SHTM 2025 and the transition to the new standards, which were more explicit, but we hadn't caught up in our minds that you had to be absolutely explicit at that point as to what you were definitely not in accordance with and register it. So that was our mindset.
Again, just so I'm understanding that the guidance notes within the environmental matrix are correct, set the correct standards. Is that your position?
Yes.
Okay. But you've accepted that actually within the detail, some of the sub-entries within the spreadsheets don't comply with the guidance set out in the Scottish Health Technical Memo.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say the guidance notes and the room function reference sheet is correct. It's how we translated the data into some of the cells, which was a human error. If we weren't aware of it, it would not be recognised as a derogation. And if we had been aware of it, we'd not have left it there at that time and listed it as a derogation because it was clearly wrong.
You were asked to give this confirmation in the February, but as we've seen from the environmental matrix that we looked at, the design work that Hulley and Kirkwood undertook, including an environmental, continued until at least the September of that year. Is that correct?
There actually wasn't a lot of design work in between those two periods. In fact, I don't think there was any. There was a re-establishment of communication from, I can't remember, it was David Stilley, I think, who said the schedule of accommodation has moved on beyond where we had established a point by March of 2012. So it moved on from version 10 to version 13. And they asked us to refresh the matrix on that schedule of accommodation.
So at this point, the document that we're in February month, there's the refresh that's done in September. It doesn't seem that Hulley and Kirkwood or any of the other reference design team were asked the same question again about compliance with the final version of the environmental matrix. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you know why that was?
No.
Just while we're within the context of the environmental matrix, one issue that seems to be controversial among certain of the core participants is within the environmental matrix itself, what values would take precedence. So you've said got the guidance notes, which set out the correct values for critical care areas. And then we've looked at certain of the sub-entry which you've accepted there are some errors in. Now, certain individuals that may give evidence suggest that it's the detail of the spreadsheet that takes precedence. Others suggest that it's the guidance notes that take precedence. What's your views?
The guidance notes, the room reference sheet are both going with 10. There's a thermal comfort report that also mentions an approach of 10 in critical care. If I had 3 statements that had 10 and a cell that said 4, I would be going with 10. As an engineer, if there was any doubt, I would always sit on the side of caution, go with the most onerous case until it was clarified.
And again, in fairness, that's what you say at paragraph 33 of your statement, which is, as an engineer, your understanding is that you would always go with the most onerous requirement. Is that correct? And if there was any doubt, if you spotted that disconnect between a general guidance note and a specific value 50% less than that guidance note value, what would you do?
I would clarify it. I would query it. I would query it.
And again, after final environmental matrix is produced by Hulley and Kirkwood, do you recollect anyone from Watt McDonald, Davis Langdon, or NHS Lothian coming back and asking Hulley and Kirkwood for clarification on that? I can now ask you to have in front of you, please, bundle 4, page 203. I think this is a document that you've referred to before. It's called a thermal comfort analysis.
Yes.
What was this document and why did Hulley and Kirkwood produce it?
It was produced because we needed to analyse the mixed mode ventilation approach for ward bedrooms could achieve the 25 degrees maximum temperature limit in summertime in every possible orientation of that type of room. So the analysis was done to determine what combination of natural and mechanical ventilation could actually achieve that. We simulated a natural ventilation only option to demonstrate actually that the numbers showed that summertime temperatures would go beyond 25 up to 28 and even beyond 28 degrees, and that with the mixed mode ventilation approach that 25 degrees could be achieved.
If we look on to page 288 within bundle 4, paragraph 1.2, simulation progression, do you see that?
Yeah.
And then the bold heading indented simulation 1, wardroom served by mechanical fresh air supply related to 4 air changes per hour, cooled to control zone temperatures to 25 degrees or less. Windows in simulated spaces are closed continually. You see that?
Yeah.
And then simulation 2, wardroom served by mechanical fresh air supply related to 4 air changes per hour, cooled to control zone temperature to 25 degrees or less. See that?
Yes.
Again, the answer may be obvious from what you've already said, but why do we see that being 4 air changes per hour?
Well, the benefit of minimising the amount of mechanical ventilation in combination with natural ventilation is manifests in reduced energy consumption and reduced capital cost.
And why not model it on 6 air?
6 air changes per hour is more air, more consumption, more cost, and if you have the opportunity to take beneficial advantage of our climate for natural ventilation, why would you automatically go to a more onerous condition?
In terms of the thermal comfort analysis that was done, was there any analysis done on any air changes per hour for critical care rooms?
There wasn't.
Why not?
Because experience shows that where you have 10 air changes of comfort cooled supply air in almost any healthcare environment, but definitely in critical care, that the maximum temperature of 25 degrees is not exceeded.
If we look on within the report, page 293, bundle, paragraph 2.6 about the building geometry.
Sorry, it was just I didn't quite get that. Question whether any analysis was done on the basis of air change, or said no, as experience indicates that the maximum temperature of 25 degrees, did you then go on to say will not be exceeded in the event that there are 10 air changes per hour?
Correct.
Got it. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. McGregor.
And if we then look on to page 290, building geometry, I think we see that set out just in the paragraph just above the diagram. There's wording beginning, as such, critical care. See that?
Yes.
As such, critical care and high dependency type wardrooms with air change rate, 10 air changes an hour, have not been analysed. See that?
Yes.
So firstly, a narration there that if you're in critical care, 10 air changes an hour, there's no need for you to do thermal comfort analysis, because if you have 10 air changes, you're going to be at least the 25 degree.
Yes.
Thank you. In relation to ventilation strategy and energy use, did energy targets in relation to the project have any impact on the design from a mechanical and electrical engineering perspective?
Yeah, they're intrinsic to the mechanical electrical design approach. So the more mechanical ventilation, the higher the air change rates, the higher the energy burden that goes with that. So all healthcare bodies, healthcare trusts right across the UK are focused on trying to have the most efficient and least energy burden and lowest carbon profile healthcare estate that they can have. So yes, it's always an influence for every healthcare project, but every building project.
And again, we've looked at some of the errors in relation to critical care rooms within the body of the spreadsheet, recognising that the guidance notes are correct. If the correct values had been used in relation to those critical care rooms, would that have impacted adversely on the energy strategy?
Yes, the higher the air change rate, the more energy consumption it would have increased the consumption of energy. I would say though that these are, if you've got a 50,000 square metre hospital full of accommodation and you increase 2 or 3% of the total area by 4 to 10 year changes, it will not have a huge impact, but it will have an impact. Everything in healthcare has an impact, and it's the sum total that the minutiae where the focus is to try and reduce consumption where possible.
Thank you. I think the final thing that I would wish to raise with you, I think you've covered quite a lot of this in evidence already, but we've covered the problems say exist with the activity database, problems of manually creating an environmental matrix, and we've looked at some of the potential errors that cropped up in the project. In your view, someone who's worked on the project, works in this area, looking to the future, how could things be improved, try to make sure issues like the ones we've discussed don't crop up in?
Yeah, I've reflected on that, and and I think one of the fundamental things is the naming of rooms. The naming of rooms being what might manifest in a schedule of accommodation versus what's referenced in guidance might not be aligned. Quite often they're not aligned. And it would be a good thing if they were aligned, if there was a room naming convention that guidance and everybody involved in healthcare, building design and briefing used. So that would be a good step forward. And I think the idea I mentioned before that if the ADB database could be aligned with current standard and kept up to date with current standard, and within that there was a tool to populate an environmental matrix such that it was derived from that database, that would be a big step forward.
Thank you. Mr. Donnell, I don't have any further questions for you at this stage, but Lord Brodie might have some questions, or equally there might be some applications from core participants. But thank you for your engagement today and for answering my questions.
Thank you.
Well, there's no questions that I have at this stage. Do any of the core participants have a question, or I suppose anything that arises from Mr. O'Donnell's evidence? I'm taking that as a unanimous no. So, Mr. O'Donnell, can I thank you again for attendance and also for the preparatory work carried out to allow you to give evidence. In a general theme, I think applies to the inquiry as to many public inquiries. The more visible part is, for example, you giving evidence this morning, but I appreciate you've done a lot of work to allow you to do that. So I express my thanks for that. Now,
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
the plan, I think, would be to sit again at 2 o'clock.
Yes, my Lord, it will be Mr. Ian Graham.
Right. Well, we'll see each other again at 2.
Please stand.